Thanks for tuning in. My name is Angela. One of the first video, it would have been my second video on YouTube, was on the health benefit of apple cider vinegar. And I did promise in that video that I was going to do a video on how to make your apple cider vinegar at home. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, making apple cider vinegar at home. It's a long process. It takes about 6 weeks to complete, but you start it and then 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks down the line, you filter and then you let it sit for another 4 to 5 weeks, and then your apple cider vinegar is ready for consumption. Apple cider vinegar is all natural, it's ancient, it's been there for hundreds of years. It was used in the olden days for treating cuts, for stomach issues, for dandruff. It's still being used for dandruff, for as a cleanser, for acne treatment, for it helps with diabetic situations because it suppresses the absorption of sugar when you eat, so thereby also helping with weight loss and reduces cholesterol in the body. So it is a miracle, and since I discovered it, it's been part of my diet. So I would encourage you to try it if you haven't tried it, and also to make yours at home because it's very simple. It's one of the easiest recipe. All you need is your apple, a bit of sugar because you need sugar to ferment the apple, so that sugar is not going to be there at the end of the apple cider vinegar. It's going to break down into apple cider. So the first week of starting this process, the apple breaks down into apple cider, so you kind of smell some sort of alcoholic smell and some bubbles and in the mix. That's fine. Just know that it's going well because that's the first phase where it breaks down to alcohol, and then after the first week the alcohol starts to convert to acetic acid, which is one of the main component of apple cider vinegar, and it is good for our body. Even though it's acidic, it does balances out in our gut. It introduces a lot of good bacteria into our gut, and also reduces the bad bacteria in our gut. So this is how it is linked to helping boost our immunity. So lukewarm apple cider vinegar drink is probably the most effective for us. When we cook it, we kill the good bacteria. So not to drag this too much, what I'm going to do first of all is we're going to make our apple cider vinegar today. We're starting the process. It takes about 6 weeks to complete, but the first process today is to start it, dice our apples, put it in a jar, add water and sugar. That's it. Then it's now a waiting process. Every day you need to use a wooden implement to stir. You don't use metal because metal will interfere with the acid in the apple cider vinegar and it might start to turn to something else. Also, it's good to start with very clean implements. Your apples should be washed clean. Your jars should be clean and if possible sterilized, just to be sure. The reason being that if you don't have clean implements, you might end up with contaminated apple cider vinegar halfway through the process. And this is when you start to see like black moldy stuff at the top. That means something is going wrong, and it will be safer to throw it out and start all over again. However, apple cider vinegar, because it's acidic, would kill the minute bacteria that will come in contact with it. But if the contamination is really high, then it will overcome it, and that's when you start to see black moldy stuff. And one way to stop it is just ensure the same apples are not floating at the top of your jar always. And to do that, you have to stir with a wooden implement, maybe a chopstick or something like that, clean, and you just use it to push the apples down every day and stir it so that you move it around and the same apples are not sitting at the top, because that's when the mold starts to form on top of it. So you just push the apples out. They will come back up, but just if you do that every day, it will be fine. Hopefully it won't go wrong. So enough talking, let's get down to it. So we'll be using some filtered water, some organic sugar, and also organic apples for apple cider vinegar. The recipe is quite straightforward. It's just those are the main ingredients: apples, sugar, and water. So you could use any type of apple. It could be green, red, but the most important thing is it should be organic. However, you could use apples that are not organic. Just ensure it is washed thoroughly and rid of any pesticides or wasp, so you don't introduce that into your apple cider vinegar. So I'll be using cheesecloth to cover my apple cider vinegar mix. If you've got coffee filter, you could also use coffee filter instead. We would also be using a rubber band to hold it in place. So I'm going to start by dicing my apples. So I'm going to just cut them into cubes. I'm taking out the core of my apple. It is okay if you're using organic apples to leave the core in, but I just tend to take it out, maybe because I know apple seeds contain cyanide. I'm not saying it does any harm. A lot of people make their apple cider with the core in, but I take mine out. But if you're not using organic apples, the advice is to take the core out anyway. The rule of thumb is for each apple you use a teaspoon of sugar. So we're using 4 apples. I'm going to be using 4 teaspoons of sugar for my apple cider vinegar. So the apples are all diced. I'm going to place them in a clean jug. It is advised to use clean implements, the jug, the knife, and with the surface you dice on. Wash your apples, and this is just to avoid contamination. So for each of the apple, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar. So I'm adding 4 teaspoons of organic sugar to my diced apple. So next I'm going to add the filtered water. Filtered water is preferred for this process. If you're using tap water, just maybe let it sit, get it from the tap and just let it sit for a few hours or even overnight before you use. That allows the chlorine and any purifying agents in the water to fizzle out, and then you can use it. Otherwise, filtered water is preferred. In terms of how much water you use, you just want the water to cover the apples, but they will float anyway. But what's going to happen is once the fermentation begins and all the goodness in the apple seeps out, the apples will sink and they will be submerged in the fluid. But what we would be doing before that happens, and every day or every other day, is to use a wooden stick like I'm doing now to stir our apple and push the apples that are floating back into the water so they are submerged. Some people would use weights to keep the apples down, but that may interfere with how much air goes in and out of the apple cider vinegar mix, because it does need that interaction, which is why we use coffee sheet or cheesecloth to cover the mix whilst it's fermenting. We need to be able to allow the CO2 that is being formed out and oxygen in. So what we're going to be doing from now until between 2 and 2.5 weeks is daily use the wooden spatula to push the apples down, and just ensure the same apples are not sitting at the top of the jug every time, because when that happens, mold can start growing on at the top, forming at the top of the jug. So every other day or every day you want to use the wooden spoon, clean wooden spoon, to stir your apple and push them down. And in 2.5 weeks time, the apples will kind of be soggy and sink into the jar. That's at the point where we would need to filter and separate the apples from the liquid, and then we continue to let the liquid ferment. So next we're going to cover our mix with the cheesecloth. You could also use coffee filter. I will leave a link below to Amazon where I got my cheesecloth. If you want to use cheesecloth, I prefer cheesecloth because I would also use it for straining my apple in 2.5 weeks time when I come to separate the apples from the liquid. So you put a rubber band around the cheesecloth just to hold it and cover the jug. So the idea is to use something that has holes in it that covers it enough to keep insects away and um, have holes to allow oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. So that's the whole idea. So we don't need a tight lid because we need to allow that process of oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. We also need to keep the insects away, so cheesecloth works fine. So what we're going to do next is place this somewhere in our shelf or kitchen counter for the next 2.5 weeks, after which it will be ready for filtering. And then after filtering, it will be with us for, we'll let it sit for another 4 to 5 weeks when it's ready. So what I'm going to do now is one that I started 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to, 2.5 weeks ago I started this, sorry. So it's now ready for filtering and I'm using my cheesecloth. I'm also, if you can see, as you can see, the apples have become soggy and have kind of sunk to the bottom of the jar, and it is ready now for to separate the apples from the liquid. So I'm going to pour everything into the glass jar I have with the cheesecloth in it, and then squeeze the apples using the cheesecloth to get rid of, to squeeze out any juices left in the apple that the apples would have soaked. Just to get all that juice out, I'll squeeze the cheesecloth and separate it, and then this liquid will now sit for another 4 to 5 weeks on the counter before it's ready for use. So I'm going to pour the liquid in a mason jar, and then I'll let that sit on the counter for another 4 to 5 weeks before I can use. In that process and in that time, the fermentation continues. It is important not to use any metal implement, which is why I haven't used a funnel to pour this. I have a metal funnel, so if you have a plastic funnel you could use, but just to avoid using any metal implement at all for this, for stirring it or for using a funnel, because it would react with the acid in the apple cider vinegar. So I've put a pressure lid on it, and that's just going to sit for the next 4 to 5 weeks. This is one that I made 7 weeks ago. It is different in color because I used green apples for this. So the one I just filtered is red apple. That's why the color is different from the finished one. So this finished one, I've already used a bit of it, and it has something in the base of it, and that whitish substance in the base of it is the mother, and the mother is actually the best part of the apple cider vinegar, and don't filter it out. It is good and is full of a lot of good bacteria. So if you can stand the slimy look of it, just leave it, and you can also use it to kickstart another batch of apple cider vinegar. It actually quickens the process if you're making apple cider vinegar and you add the mother from an already made apple cider vinegar. So So this is the finished one, the lighter color, and the reddish one is the one I just filtered, and that's gonna be ready in another 4.5 weeks. So that is how to make your homemade apple cider vinegar. I was really excited when I made my first one, and I hope you get to try it and it works out. It is a simple recipe. It's dice your apples, place in a jar, add sugar, water, and then it's the waiting game. It's just the do's and don'ts around it, just to ensure you don't contaminate your apple cider vinegar. That's all we need to take note of. So thanks for watching, and until next time, stay safe. God bless.